You think you've got me figured out? Because you read a few psych textbooks? Or are you telling me you know me better than I know myself? Caleb Vance's voice exploded in the quiet office. Dr. Lena Evans didn't flinch. She looked up, the cuffs of her pale blue blouse rolled up slightly, revealing slender wrists. Don't I, Mr. Vance? Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. And all I see is a man running, full speed, into a wall he built himself. Huh. Classic therapist script. Caleb sneered, leaning over her desk. His programmer's pale face was flushed with an unnatural, angry red. Here's a secret for you. I've designed therapy AIs smarter than you. At least they don't pretend to care. Lena gently closed her notebook. The simple action seemed to infuriate Caleb even more. She was too calm, like one of those NPCs in a game, forever locked in a perfect, placid smile. You hate being seen, don't you? Lena's voice was like a precision scalpel, especially when someone points out you're hiding in a world of your own making. Afraid they'll find out you're a coward. Caleb's fingers tightened on the edge of the desk, his knuckles turning white. The worlds I create are 10,000 times better than this goddamn reality. In my worlds, characters don't just disappear. The story doesn't just, without any warning. His voice caught, as if a game character had been frozen by the pause button. The sound of rain filled the silence. Lena's gaze fell to his trembling fingers. Finish the sentence, Caleb. Doesn't, without any warning, what? Go to hell, he bit out, straightening up and grabbing his backpack. I don't need this kind of torture. His hand had just touched the doorknob when Lena's voice came from behind him. Last week, The Silent Frontier got a new update, an ending where the protagonist finally opens the forbidden door. Caleb froze. It was a hidden storyline he'd secretly coded in, with no official patch notes. You must know what's behind that door, Lena continued. A child bedroom. Glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. 2 faded stuffed animals on the bed. Caleb, that's less like game design and more like a memory. He turned, the fire in his eyes replaced by something far more fragile. You found it. I played through it 3 times, Lena said softly. The first time, out of curiosity. The second, to understand my client. The third, she paused. The third time was to find the little boy hiding behind the code, crying all alone. The rain suddenly fell harder, streaking down the glass like tears. Caleb slowly slid to the floor, his backpack slipping from his shoulder. She was only 6, he whispered, his voice barely audible. It was just a goddamn cold, and then she just never woke up. Lena slowly approached, crouching in front of him, keeping a respectful distance. Your sister? Caleb nodded, his fingers unconsciously picking at the carpet fibers. I promised I'd play the new board game with her, but I was on a crunch to push some code. A sob hitched in his throat. I didn't even make it. To see her one last time. Lena said nothing, simply offered him a box of tissues. In that moment, she wasn't a doctor and he wasn't a patient. They were just 2 people trapped by the rain. You know, Caleb said, wiping his eyes, every game I design has a hidden room. And inside, I always put that stuffed animal. Lena nodded gently. Like the room in your heart you've kept locked forever. Caleb looked up, truly seeing his therapist's eyes for the first time. They weren't the eyes of an analyst, but of an empath. Outside, a flash of lightning illuminated the strange pair in the office. A genius game developer curled up on the floor, and a therapist crouched before him. So, Caleb asked, his voice raw, what are you supposed to say at a time like this? It's going to be okay. It wasn't your fault. Lena shook her head. At a time like this, I'm supposed to say, are you coming back next week? Caleb stared, then let out a sudden laugh, a sound mixed with the salty bitterness of tears. Damn, you therapists really are clever. Lena smiled, standing up and offering him her hand. Caleb looked at it, hesitated for a moment, and finally took it, letting her help him to his feet. See you next week, Dr. Evans. Call me Lena, she said, letting go of his hand. After all, you've already shown me your secret level. Caleb slung his backpack over his shoulder, pausing at the door. That ending, which one did you choose? Lena walked back to her desk and sat down. I chose take one of the stuffed animals with you. Caleb's back went rigid for a second. Then he gave a slight nod and walked out into the rain. Lena watched the door close, then thoughtfully opened her notebook and drew a small star next to today's date. The blinds cut the afternoon sun into stripes across the office. Caleb sat at the intersection of light and shadow, his fingers drumming a restless rhythm on the armrest of his chair. It had been 2 weeks since his emotional outburst. He had kept his appointment, but the walls he'd built were now even higher. Played the Umbral Spire? He asked abruptly, his eyes fixed on the seams of the floorboards. New indie release. Lena put down her pen. Not yet. I hear it's incredibly difficult. Not difficult. Caleb said with a twitch of his lips. The dev is just a sadist. Every time you think you're near the exit, the whole level inverts and throws you back to the beginning. Lena gently turned the thin silver bracelet on her wrist. Sounds frustrating. But people keep playing, Caleb said, finally looking up. He had the dark circles of insomnia under his eyes. Because the system keeps hinting that the real exit is just one more try away. Like you, coming here every week, Lena's voice was a feather falling on still water. The drumming stopped. Caleb stared at her, his atoms apple bobbing. What's that supposed to be? More of your cheap therapist rhetoric. No, Lena said, leaning forward, a strand of hair falling beside her ear. It's just an observation. You know that coming here will hurt, yet you show up every Wednesday at 3 p.m. sharp, like you're completing a daily quest in a game. Caleb shot to his feet, the legs of his chair scraping harshly against the floor. He walked to the window, his back to her. Did you know that yesterday I deleted the entire source code for the Silent Frontier? Lena's breath hitched. Why? Because players love that hidden room too much, he said, his voice trembling with a cold rage. They were writing analyses on Reddit, making up backstories for the stuffed animals, drawing fan art, like a flock of vultures feasting on my memories. The sunlight edged his silhouette in gold, but the shadow he cast was immense, far larger than his frame. Lena looked at his silhouette, recalling a description from a psychiatry textbook. Post-traumatic stress disorder often presented with emotional numbing and hypervigilance. Caleb, she said softly. His shoulders immediately tensed. On what grounds? Because people need to talk face-to-face, Lena's voice grew firm. Just like an NPC in a game has to be facing the player to trigger a dialogue. The gaming analogy finally worked. Caleb turned slowly but remained out of the direct sunlight, completely immersed in shadow. Lena noticed he was wearing a black t-shirt today, one with a pixel art tombstone on it. I looked up your sister's medical records, Lena said, cutting straight to the point. Sudden cardiac arrest brought on by viral myocarditis. It was completely unforeseeable. It wasn't anyone's fault. Caleb's expression twisted. Who gave you the right to? As your therapist, I have the right to understand the source of your trauma, Lena interrupted. But do you know what really surprised me? The records that followed. Your parents passed away within a year of each other. Your father from alcohol-related liver failure, and your mother. Shut up. Caleb grabbed a mug from the coffee table and hurled it against the wall. Ceramic fragments exploded like shrapnel. His breathing became ragged and shallow. You think digging all this up is going to fix me? Lena didn't move an inch, even as a shard of porcelain grazed her shin. No, but you have to acknowledge the craters are there before you can learn to walk around them. Caleb started to laugh, a sound like it was being forced from a broken accordion. You know, I really hate people like you. You self-proclaimed bringers of light, holding up your torches, determined to illuminate every dark corner. He pulled at the collar of his shirt, revealing a barcode tattoo just above his collarbone. See this? This is my save point. Every time I feel like I'm about to break, I look at this and remind myself I'm just a program that can be reset. Lena suddenly stood and walked toward him. Caleb instinctively backed away until his back hit the window. She stopped half a step away from him and reached out, gently touching the tattoo on his chest with her index finger. But people don't have a reset button, she said, her fingertips surprisingly warm. Caleb, your sister wouldn't want you to live your life as a looping script. Caleb violently grabbed her wrist, his grip tight enough to leave a bruise. They stood frozen at the boundary of light and shadow, the sound of their breathing sharp in the quiet room. Finally, he was the one to let go, stumbling back to his chair. Next week. His voice was a raw, broken whisper. I might not come. Lena returned to her seat, tiny beads of blood forming on the cut on her leg. Do you know the true ending of the Umbral Spire? Caleb lifted his bloodshot eyes. The Real exit is back at the very beginning, Lena said, pressing a tissue to her wound. The player has to give up on the obsession with reaching a higher level and turn back to see the door they missed. The chime indicating the end of the session sounded. Caleb sat motionless until Lena pushed a slip of paper across the desk toward him. What's this? He asked, staring at the address. The Children's Play Therapy Center, Lena said, packing her briefcase. They need a professional to consult on developing therapeutic games for special needs kids. Thursday, 3 p.m. Think about it. Caleb crumpled the paper and tossed it into the trash can. Not a chance. Why not? Because you'd have to face actual, living children. Lena paused at the door. Or are you afraid of discovering they're braver than you are? The sound of the door closing was like a sigh. Caleb paced in front of the therapy center for 23 minutes. Rain dripped from the ends of his hair, darkening the fabric of his gray hoodie. Through the glass doors, he could hear the laughter of children, a sound so sharp it made his temples throb. "You're 17 minutes late." Lena's voice came from behind him. Caleb spun around to see her holding a clear umbrella, a pale green dress visible under her white lab coat. No briefcase, no notebook. Right now, she didn't look like a doctor. "I wasn't planning on coming," Caleb mumbled, kicking at a puddle. "I was just passing by." Lena smiled. "Lying doesn't suit you. You know you always touch your left wrist when you lie." She gestured to where his hand was unconsciously fiddling with his watch band. Caleb dropped his hand as if burned. They looked at each other through the curtain of rain, an invisible tension stretching between them, punctuated by the drumming of raindrops on the umbrella. "Since you're here," Lena said, tilting her head toward the entrance, "why not take a look before you go?" The scene inside hit Caleb like the mute button had been pressed on the world. The brightly colored walls were painted with cartoon clouds, and stuffed animals were piled in the corners. A few kids were gathered around a large screen, playing a motion control game. A little girl in a yellow raincoat was sitting alone in a corner, seriously combing a doll's hair. "That's Lily. She's 7, Lena explained softly. "Her parents were killed in a car crash. She refuses to speak to anyone now." Caleb's breathing grew heavy. The doll in the little girl's hands. It was a faded rabbit with one of its ears torn. It was almost identical to the one his sister had loved most. "How do you treat them?" His voice sounded like it was coming from a great distance. "Through games," Lena said, guiding him toward a display case. "These tools help children express emotions they can't put into words. Sand tray therapy, for instance, can't." Caleb wasn't listening. His eyes were glued to the little girl, watching as she buried her face in the doll's soft belly, her small shoulders shaking. In that instant, he saw himself 7 years ago, huddled on a bench outside the morgue, clutching the very same doll. "I have to go," he said abruptly, his voice as taut as a wire about to snap. Lena didn't try to stop him, just took something from her pocket. "Take this." It was a pixel art keychain of a small knight holding a cracked shield. Caleb recognized it. It was a character from one of his earliest games. "The shield might be cracked," Lena said, placing it in his palm, "but it still works." Rainwater beaded on the keychain's surface. Caleb clenched his fist around it and ran back out into the downpour without looking back. 3 a.m. In his office. 7 empty cans of coffee were piled on Caleb's desk. The blue light of the monitor illuminated his exhausted face. On the screen was a new game interface, a sparse hospital room, a blurry figure lying on the bed. His fingers hovered over the keyboard for a long time before finally hitting the delete key. The character models vanished one by one, leaving only an empty bed. Outside, the city lights looked like stars trapped on the other side of the glass. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Lena. "The center is having creation workshop next week. The kids want to learn how to design simple games." Caleb stared at the screen, his thumb hovering over the virtual keyboard. 3 minutes later, another text popped up. "You don't have to see anyone. You just have to teach them how to turn their ideas into a game. The same way you taught me to understand the meaning of a secret level." Rain began to tap against the window. Caleb slowly typed a reply. "What are the hardware specs?" After hitting send, he placed his phone face down on the desk, reached deep into a drawer, and pulled out a faded star-shaped sticker. He gently pressed it onto the bezel of his monitor. It was the last thing his sister had given him before her final hospital stay. He'd never had the heart to use it. Outside, the rain fell harder, but a pale, gray-white light was already breaking in the east. Caleb shut down his computer and hung the keychain Lena had given him on the keyboard tray. In the faint light of dawn, a sliver of morning seemed to shine through the crack in the little knight's shield. Caleb stood outside the glass doors of the Children's Play Therapy Center, the keychain from Lena clutched in his hand. The knight's shield had a crack in it, which felt like some kind of metaphor. The very thing that protects you is often the thing that traps you. He took a deep breath and pushed the door open. Lena was in the middle of explaining the basic logic of game designed to the children. When she saw him, her eyes lit up for a moment before she composed herself. She just gave him a small nod, as if she'd known all along he would come. "This is Mr. Vance," she announced to the kids. Her tone as casual as if he were just another volunteer. "He's going to teach you all how to design your own little games." Caleb gave a stiff nod, but his gaze drifted involuntarily to the corner, to the little girl in the yellow raincoat, Lily, who was still sitting quietly, hugging her tattered rabbit doll. He walked over and crouched down, keeping a slight distance. "You like rabbits?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Lily didn't answer, just buried her face deeper into the doll. Caleb was silent for a moment, then took out his phone. He opened a simple drawing app and sketched a pixel art rabbit with a torn ear. Like this? He asked, turning the screen toward her. The little girl finally looked up, her dark eyes fixed on the screen. Then, very faintly, very slightly, she nodded. Caleb's fingers trembled. After the workshop ended, Lena was packing up supplies while Caleb stood by the window, watching Lily being led away by a caregiver. The girl was still holding the rabbit, but this time, she looked back at him. She rarely responds to strangers, Lena said softly, coming to stand beside him. Caleb didn't speak, just stared at the palm of his hand, at the old, faded scar there from the day his sister died, when he had punched a pane of glass. You know, he said suddenly, I deleted the source code for the Silent Frontier, not because the players loved the hidden room, but because I was afraid they'd actually understand it. Lena watched him quietly. The main character in the game is always looking for an exit, he said with a bitter smile. But the truth is, the exit is accepting that there is no exit. Ironic, isn't it? I designed the whole world, but I was the one trapped inside. Lena gently touched the back of his hand. It was warm. Caleb, she said, you're not a game character. You don't have an ending. He looked up at her and saw something in her eyes he'd never seen before. Not pity, not a doctor's professional analysis, but pure, simple belief. Then, what am I? He asked in a low voice. Lena smiled. You're someone who's still writing his story. 3 months later, Caleb stood on stage at a game launch event. Behind him, the big screen displayed his new creation, Glimmer. It wasn't a game about finding an exit, but about learning to light a candle in the dark. A reporter in the audience asked a question. Mr. Vance, the style of this game is very different from your previous work. What was your inspiration? Caleb's eyes scanned the crowd and landed on the back row. Lena was sitting there quietly, holding the Pixel Knight keychain he had given her. He smiled. Someone told me that people don't have a reset button, but we can learn how to save. After the press conference, Lena was waiting for him backstage. Congratulations, she said. The game is wonderful. Caleb looked at her and asked abruptly, You knew all along, didn't you? Knew what? You knew I'd come back. Lena blinked, a slight smile playing on her lips. No, I just believed that you'd find the answer yourself. Caleb was silent for a moment, then pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. It was the address of the children's center she'd given him. He kept it all this time. Lena, he said softly, and I'm just saying if. I want to try, not seeing myself as a piece of code, but as a person. Do you think it's too late? She looked at him, her eyes like gentle lakes in the soft light. Caleb, she answered, in life, there's no too late or not too late. There's only starting and not starting. He took a deep breath, and then, for the first time, he reached out his hand to her. Lena smiled and took it. Outside, dusk was falling, and the first star of the evening had just appeared. Caleb's hand was cold, like someone who had been drenched in rain for a long time was finally touching the sun. Lena didn't let go. Instead, she tightened her fingers slightly, as if to say wordlessly, I'm here. They walked out of the venue into the deep night. The city's neon lights shimmered in blurry reflections on the rain-slicked pavement. Caleb suddenly stopped. His voice was a little hoarse. I haven't been out at night in a long time. Lena tilted her head. Scared? No. He shook his head. Just used to the light from a screen. She laughed and pointed to a convenience store down the street, still open. Then how about we try a real-world side quest, like buying a hot drink? Caleb followed her. When the glass doors slid open automatically, he unconsciously tensed his shoulders. The fluorescent lights of the convenience store were too bright, the aisles of products too neatly arranged. It felt like a lifeless, pre-rendered scene from a game. Lena picked up 2 cans of hot chai latte and handed one to him. As he took it, his fingertips brushed against hers. The difference in temperature made him start. Your hands are so warm, he said. A professional perk for therapists, Lena said, popping the top of her can. You listen to other people's stories all day, your heart gets warmer. Caleb looked down at his own drink. Steam rose, blurring his vision. Lena, why did you pick me? You know what I mean, he said, looking up. You could have chosen patients who were easier to cure. Lena was quiet for a moment, then pointed to a street lamp outside the store. Moths were circling the halo of light. Look at them, she said. They know they'll probably smash themselves to pieces, but they can't stop flying toward the light. She looked back at Caleb. You're the same way. You say you hate the light, but in every single game you design, you hide stars. Caleb's heart clenched. They sat on a bench outside the store, the night air cool on their skin. Lena suddenly asked, Do you know why I love the Silent Frontier? Caleb shook his head. Because of the protagonist's final choice, she said softly. He could choose to stay in that room of memory forever, or He could take one thing with him and keep moving forward. Caleb tightened his grip on the can, the metal denting under his fingers. My sister. Her name was Stella. Lena listened quietly. The day she died, I was supposed to be playing a new board game with her. Caleb's voice was so low it was almost lost in the night wind. But I was on a crunch, trying to push some code. I just kept thinking, I'll play with her tomorrow. Lena didn't say, it wasn't your fault, or offer him a tissue. She simply reached out and covered his trembling hand with her own. Caleb took a deep breath. In Glimmer, I added a secret ending. Oh, if the player collects all the star stickers, it unlocks a final cut scene. He looked toward the distant night sky. It's Stella, as a little kid, flying a kite in a field. Lena's eyes glistened. She would have loved that. Caleb turned to her then, his gaze so earnest it was almost fragile. Lena, if I try to walk out of this, will you? I'll be there to catch you when you fly into the street lamp, Lena smiled. But I won't ever stop you from chasing the light. Caleb looked at her and suddenly smiled. It was the first time Lena had seen him truly smile, without irony, without defenses. It was like a frozen lake finally cracking open. You know, he said, you're a lot harder to deal with than my AIs. Lena raised an eyebrow. Is that a compliment? It's a save point, Caleb said softly. I think. I want to remember this moment. 6 months later, the Children's Play Therapy Center hosted a special exhibition. Caleb stood in a corner, watching Lily in the center of the room. The girl was wearing a yellow sundress, no more raincoat, and was earnestly showing her game to visitors. On the screen, a pixel rabbit hopped across a starry sky. With every star collected, the night grew a little brighter. She named the rabbit you designed for her, Lena said, walking up beside him with 2 cups of coffee. Caleb took one. What's its name? Stella. Lena smiled. She says it's a rabbit that will never disappear. Caleb's fingers tightened, the paper cup buckling slightly. He looked at Lily, and she happened to look up, her eyes meeting his across the crowded room. Then, she did something that surprised everyone. She held up the stuffed rabbit she was carrying, gave it a little wave in his direction, and broke into a small but genuine smile. Caleb froze. Lena gave him a gentle nudge. Mr. Game Designer, I think your youngest player is waiting for some feedback. Caleb slowly walked toward Lily, crouching down to meet her gaze. Your game, his voice was a little rough, is amazing. Lily blinked, and then suddenly pushed her stuffed rabbit into his hands. A lopsided, hand-sewn fabric star was stitched onto its belly. For Stella's brother, she said. Her voice was as light as a feather, but every word was clear. Caleb felt something warm well up in his eyes. He carefully took the doll and saw that the torn ear had been meticulously repaired. The stitches were clumsy, but they were strong. Thank you, he said, the 2 words feeling as if they weighed 1,000 pounds. Lily nodded, then turned and ran back to her game display, her yellow dress flitting like a small sunflower. Caleb stood up and saw Lena watching him from short distance away, her eyes full of a gentle, radiant light. He walked toward her, clutching the stuffed rabbit. She's so much like... Caleb started, then stopped. Stella? Lena asked softly. Caleb gripped the stuffed rabbit, but for the first time, it didn't bring a stab of pain. Instead, a strange sense of peace washed over him. Yeah, my sister, he said. The way Lily smiles. It's just like her. Lena didn't offer any comforting platitudes. She just stood by his side, a steady and reliable presence, like a lighthouse. Lena, Caleb said abruptly, I want to go see her. Now. Yeah, Caleb nodded. It's been 6 years. I've never been to the cemetery. Lena's eyes widened slightly, but she quickly composed herself. Do you want me to come with you? Caleb shook his head. No, I think I need to do this alone. He paused, then added, but tomorrow. Can you go somewhere with me tomorrow? Where? An amusement park, Caleb said. Stella always wanted to go, but I never took her. Lena's eyes grew moist. Okay. As the exhibition wound down, parents began leaving with their children. Lily was led over by her caregiver, her small hands clutching the straps of her backpack. Is Mr. Vance leaving? She asked, her voice a little louder than before. Caleb crouched down at her level. Yeah, see you tomorrow. Lily nodded, then reached out and touched the stuffed rabbit in his hand. Stella, like stars. Caleb felt his throat tighten. I know. Mr. Vance? Lily hesitated, her little face scrunched in concentration as she tried to form the words. My game. Can I have more stars? Of course you can, Caleb smiled. What kind of stars do you want? Talking ones. Lily's eyes lit up. Like in Mr. Vance's other game. Caleb was stunned. He had never told a soul that each twinkling star in the silent frontier contained a hidden audio file of something Stella had said when she was alive. Okay, he heard himself say. Talking stars. Lily beamed, satisfied. As she left with her caregiver, she turned and waved. Goodbye, star brother. The name was like an arrow that struck the softest part of Caleb's heart. He stood there, watching Lily's small yellow figure disappear down the hall, his hand tight around the stuffed rabbit. You know, he said, turning back to Lena, for the Glimmer 2 proposal, I'm thinking of adding a co-op mode. Lena raised an eyebrow. Oh, it'll need a consultant who understands psychology, Caleb said, looking at her. The pay isn't great, but coffee's included. Lena laughed. That sounds like a raw deal. Also, Caleb took a deep breath. This consultant has to be willing to go stargazing with me once in a while. Lena looked into his eyes. They were no longer a desolate wasteland, but a place where a faint light had begun to flicker. Deal, she said. Lena gently took his arm. Come on, I'll walk you out. Night had fallen, and the streetlights were turning on one by one. Caleb and Lena walked side by side on the pavement, their shadows stretching long behind them. What time tomorrow? Lena asked. 10 a.m., Caleb suggested. Right when the park opens. Okay, Lena nodded. I'll meet you at the center's entrance. They parted ways at the intersection. Caleb watched Lena's figure recede, melting into the city lights. He looked up at the night sky. There were more stars now than before, like tiny lamps illuminating the vast darkness. Back home, Caleb placed the stuffed rabbit carefully on a bookshelf, next to a photograph of Stella. In the picture, the little girl was wearing a red dress, holding an ice cream cone, and smiling, so wide her eyes were shaped like crescent moons. We're going to the amusement park tomorrow, Stella, he said softly, his fingers brushing the frame. Outside, a shooting star streaked across the sky. It was gone in an instant, but it left behind a trail of brilliant light. Caleb stood at the window and felt, for the first time, that maybe the pain would never fully disappear. But it could become a part of him, like stars dotting the night sky, ensuring that memory was no longer just a place of darkness.